My name is Andy Jones, and I coordinate the Faculty Mentoring Faculty Program for the Teaching Resources Center, as I've done for a number of years now. And every Friday at 12:30 this quarter anyway, we welcome, as has been mentioned, really motivated teachers who also have innovative approaches to improving their students' learning and learning opportunities. And although I've spent almost no time inside a classroom with Ben Orlove, I would definitely lump him in that category. Ben and I have had many conversations about a great number of topics, substantive and trivial, and I'm really pleased that he's agreed to speak to us on a topic that fascinated me during the few consultations that Michaela Hunsinger and I, Michaela from the Teaching Resources Center as well, had with Ben about a water course that he was due to teach this fall, and really thinking about how can we challenge ourselves as teachers of small classes as well as large to take into account the research that's been done in recent years about how adults learn, and how when we give them opportunities to experience the information of the course rather than just read about it, that we can also make our classes, as Dick Walters would say, be more student-centered and activity-driven and dependent upon multiple opportunities for feedback, informal and formative, as well as the necessary summative feedback that we offer in our classes. And I'd say that Ben has done a lot of interesting work and done a lot of thinking on these topics, so I'm very pleased that he could come today and that I could introduce him to all of you from the Department of Environmental Science and Policy. Yes. Here is Ben Orlove. Ben.
Well, it's great to be here and a chance to pay back just a little bit of the immense sense of gratitude I have to the TRC and the Campus Writing Center for who I've gained so much from them, and I hope the students have as well. And this comes really, as Andy was saying, from conversations that we had that were, come on in if this is the room you're looking for, but don't if it isn't. It is, yes. So it's, I think was talking to Andy about this seminar that I was going to give on water that I'll be talking about in a moment, partly because I knew him, but also because I'd had such positive experiences with the teaching support here on campus through the TRC, and that really was mostly for my large undergraduate class. So I think there's really a connection between between teaching undergraduate and graduate, between teaching on different scales, and it's really Gary Goodman who I think is the one who really consolidated to me in my mind how important the teaching, the TRC was. I'd had a course that I thought just faced insuperable obstacles trying to basically present the idea of, it's that course, which isn't even on my presentation, which I will get to, that undergraduate course is basically a stealth course in either critical thinking or science and technology studies. It's a course on paradigms to the students who've really never been exposed to paradigms, who are prepared to go from class to class thinking that there is a framework and they will just master that framework, and they will master it for the duration of the 10 weeks plus finals week. I guess that adds up to 11, and then they will just completely delete and free up some space. Continuing this digression of a digression I had of the moments when I wished that I was wired with a recorder most intensely in my life was when a friend of us, one of my son's friends who is at UCSD, came over and gave a description of what a sociology course taught by a feminist seems like to an engineer. And he said, it's not bad. You don't really have to do all of the readings. There are some words. There are some words you just have to use in the essays. And it took him a while to pull up those words from his mind. There were 3 of them. I'm sure you know what they were. But he didn't really understand them. He knew one was gender, and then there was, it took him a while to get race, and then finally class came up, and he sort of knew that if he just strung enough paragraphs together with those words used frequently enough, and that he'd do fine, get his B+ and be back to his engineering. And it was really quite a testimony to what it seemed like to him and what a challenge it is to make this stuff alive. And so the thing that I wish to make as alive as race, class, and gender was the notion of paradigm, the notion that there are perspectives, that there's no one right way to think about anything, particularly what the subject of that course was. This line of digressions will neatly compress back, and then we'll get to the seminar, including the topic of that course. Once again, an interdisciplinary course. Environment, society, and culture, how did they fit together? Well, they're different paradigms. So I had to introduce the students to the idea of paradigm and to the paradigms themselves. And it just seemed too much to fit into a quarter, too much for students who hadn't had enough writing background, and particularly facing the range of students in that course. And Gary Goodman was really a course therapist. She said, you feel stuck. You feel there is no hope. You feel your life cannot move forward. You do not possess the resources. Let's just talk about this. And so completely redesigned the course. And it was just more fun to teach and more fun to take. And it is somewhat better. That, in turn, just consolidated in my mind the importance of the Teaching Resources Center, seeking Andy when this water course was coming up, and Andy asked me to talk about that, and I thought that I first was just going to talk about that, and then I realized that I could do sort of before and after. You could see how good the after is when you see how bad the before was. So I'm now going to talk about several courses I've taught, and these really are the same kinds of issues that I faced in the larger undergraduate class, except there are more students, and I work with the TA, and but also make use of the Smart Site. So there are these three courses. The first one that I taught, you can see, is cross-listed between ecology and international agricultural development. I taught it, I think, 4 times. It has the title Sustainable Development in it. I hung on to Third World, although I probably would succumb now to just calling them developing countries. So this was large, and there were students from a couple of, 25 is large for a graduate course. It might have even been larger. And the course basically is filled with structure, which I said, and the students weren't very happy. I should say that there are complementary strengths in these ecology and IAD programs. The ecology program is very large. It's, of the graduate programs, if you take a whole list of the graduate program, if you take a complete list of the graduate programs in Davis and you put next to them the number assigned to them by some, by whatever those ranking agencies are, source institutions, ecology has the smallest number of any UC Davis program. It's one of the, we're really in the top 3 or 5 nationally in ecology. It's large, it's mostly biology, has a little bit of what is called human ecology, sort of a loose grab bag. And so the students are very confident, they're scientists, and a number of them do want to hear about sustainable development, so they can bring a lot to the course, mostly PhD students. International agricultural development is one of, there are very few universities in the country, Cornell is another one, that offer these IAD programs, and these are master's programs, and really kind of a practitioner program. It's most of the students have extensive experience in third world countries, a lot of returned Peace Corps volunteers, and they really want to kind of put it all together and somehow bring about rural development. So they also have a lot to offer. And so that was a great and almost completely unrealized potential. Here's a little more on the course. Understanding sustainability. I actually think, if you know that I like the word paradigm, you're probably not surprised to hear that I like the word oxymoron, and sustainable development, I think, is an oxymoron. Development means more and more and more year by year. Sustainability means more and more year by year in the short to medium run, and sustainability means exactly the same in the long run. Very hard to fit together. Someone asked me what it is, and I said you could call it a hope and a lie. But they're good words. They're both good words, and they're both fuzzy words. So I came up with this whole scheme. I came up with what I remain persuaded is a brilliant scheme. The first time I taught it with 4 resources, which was excessive, and then I moved to these 3 resources: soils, fisheries, and biodiversity. And these are things that there are amounts of. There's like a certain amount of soil in the world, there's a certain amount of fish, and there's a certain number of species, and they can get used up. I was biking this morning and was quite surprised to see how brown that the Dry Creek and Willow Creek merge somewhere west of town, and then they flow just south of the landfill. And so some of our topsoil was flowing out at quite a pace this morning. but soil is formed. Fish populations can decline and can increase, and even new species can evolve. They just take a long time to evolve, and we're losing them fast. But there are all these stocks of things that you want to have in the planet. That's the sustainable part, and what's the development part? Well, here are the 4 themes for each of the resources. They're distributed spatially, and they have this time scale of renewability, and there's this whole pattern of ownership. Soil is on privately managed farms, and fish are often in international waters, which ties in with the management institutions, which shapes the history of policy. So here is like, and that in turn creates a space for management options. So I thought, isn't this like a completely fantastic scheme? Shouldn't they just love to be involved in this? And I even thought I would break them into groups, and I would assign them to groups, because I wanted to have some of the IAD students in with some of the ecology students. And I thought, well, this is so important that of course they won't mind doing a lot of reading, and I'll tell them just what they have to read, and then they'll happily get together to I'll figure out all these different kind of materials and resource things they can post to the course website, and it'll be a resource for them forever as they go through life. They will remember their happy 10 weeks in 217. And it wasn't an utter failure, but it was, you had the students, the students in the 2 programs. I did not, it would be a challenge to bridge those 2 programs, because the IAD people basically mistrust scientists who they feel that the scientists often have a view that all problems are technical problems, and if you just find the right mix of fertilizer or something, everything will be okay. And they think that what you really need is community organization, and the ecology students are a phrase I've used more than once is eco-prince and eco-princesses. That's not quite fair, but there is a level of confidence, a level of self-assurance that many of them have that means that they are prepared not to give full weight to what they see as very soft kind of experience in the Peace Corps. So the groups, there is tension with the IAD, the ecology students. Some of them really wanted to press it into being a small graduate seminar where they'll just discuss the content of the papers, and the IAD students really wanted more kind of group process sort of stuff. And they did some kind of role-playing games where, you'll be the, someone will be the national park ranger, and someone else will be the villager, and someone else will be the endangered tapir, and they'll all sort of interact. And that did not, those were some of my saddest moments in the class, when I felt it was just descending into chaos. But the discussions themselves were stiff. And the thing is, the other problem is that this was really a popular course title. So people would register for it, and I really had very little incentive to limit enrollment, because there's funding that follows graduate students, and my department liked to have more enrollment, and it was also hard to say no. I didn't quite think of how I could what would be an optimal size to hold it to. So I think that also meant that when you push all the chairs, I'm just now recalling how hard it was to get all the chairs around the edge of the room, and so I, of course, and then the moments when we break into small groups, I was just hovering, fearful that I was wasting time. So, I mean, the papers were okay, they got some understanding, but they did not totally get everything I hoped for here. The next course is also an interdisciplinary graduate course. I had edited an anthropology journal for a while, and this is, anthropology kind of spans, since it's the study of everything human in all places and times, it has both a more sciencey side with human evolution and archaeology, as well as a more kind of cultural and humanistic side. And Current Anthropology is a journal that attempts to cover it. The editorship came with a fair amount of work, and I was assured that in the old days in many universities, deans would tell department chairs to give faculty release time for editing journals, that just would be yet another you know, at least a rhinestone in the very bejeweled crown of UC Davis, if not perhaps a more valuable gem. But they didn't, and so what I did was set up, partly just because I felt I didn't have the time for all of this, and also because I wanted to involve grad students, I set up a graduate course. Students took the course, mostly from anthropology, but there were some ecologists. There were actually a strong presence from Native American studies, sometimes several linguists. So there was some level of, this was smaller and more instructor, still fairly instructor-led. I mean, I was the editor, but more satisfaction. So the idea was to give students journal experience. And I think this is just very appealing to graduate students, is one of the reasons why it worked out. It ran for, the students made a 6-quarter commitment. So that's like a lot of quarters, but it does mean that every year, once it got rolling, there'd be 4 students leaving, 4 first years moving to second years, and then 4 new first years. And I always believed it wasn't that onerous. There are several tasks that they had. One was reviewing manuscripts, sets of manuscripts and reviews for publications. Of course, anyone who submits an article, a manuscript to your journal, would assume that graduate students wouldn't touch it even if wearing latex gloves. It would be contaminated by some non-PhD-ness. But what they were allowed, and they didn't review, but what they did was, if manuscripts came in with mixed reviews, what they did would be to read the manuscript, read the reviews, and kind of just summarize the issues, and then we would talk about what it was. And this was a little bit of offloading work for me, but it actually was, it was more sort of parallel, because the discussions would be longer than they needed to be. It wasn't just, let's move this one along. I thought of the grad students in a sense as the beta testers. They really are the intended audience of the journal, or a key audience. And so it was very, I believe, empowering and even liberating for them to sort of to open the doors that were so often closed, and to see what things look like from behind, and to discover the tenured faculty at, well, since I can name at least the university or not, the tenured faculty at Princeton don't know that when you pluralize nouns, you don't put an apostrophe before the S. Very liberating for them, I think. They wrote short news items. These would be summaries of articles, recent articles in other journals, and they would have a title and a byline, so this is something that they could actually list in their CV. They would help select books for review. These books kept on coming in, and we could review just a fraction of them. So they would pick books for review, and we'd consider them. And I tried to be both encouraging of their interests while pointing out why my taste differed. And I guess the single most important thing was hard for them to grasp that this was an international journal, and that meant that we couldn't just review interesting books about the U.S. Because we get more books from U.S. publishers, and that sometimes we design special issues, papers would, enough papers came in that sometimes we'd find a pair that had something in common, and then there might be a third one that could join and sort of that way form a special issue, and we'd discuss what the theme might be. So I think how could this not be nice? There were concrete career benefits. I think it doesn't hurt to list it on their CV. It was pleasant. The journal actually paid to take everyone out to lunch at what used to be Fuzio's, and Fuzio's left became that new sort of fusion. Well, whatever it's become, it's not quite as much to my taste, and it was funny that happened just soon after we had our last winter lunch there, and there was a little spring party. The final thing I should mention is that not only is it interdisciplinary in that the students came from different programs, the anthropology department itself is divided into these 2 wings. The evolutionary wing, which is the archaeology and human evolution, and then the sociocultural wing, which is the more humanistic side. And they really operate fairly separately and tolerate each other. I often think of divorced couples in Soviet Russia who couldn't leave the apartment. And it's really what it was like. And here they could come together and discover that they're not crazy, the other side. So finally, the water course and Andy's involvement. This was going to be cross-listed between, was cross-listed between ecology and anthropology. There was a complicated issue. It's interesting to know about these cross-listed courses, which meant that all the anthropology students who pre-enrolled discovered that the brief overlap of that course, of the course and a course they were TAing for meant that the instructor of the course wouldn't allow them to take this seminar. And that had to do, there was a bit of a problem getting it scheduled. So I ended up with predominantly community development students, again, master's students who were, who are drawing broadly on sociology, geography, maybe a little bit of policy science to promote small scale, community development, some geography students and from students from some other programs. Here, it was a little bit bigger. Again, an intermediate level of structure. I think here more balanced between the students, my leading and the student leading. And this, I think, is really what I benefited from talking to Andy, is that I could let go and chaos would not ensue. And that, of course, led to a higher level of satisfaction. So I wanted the students to talk about water sustainability, but I thought they're all going to care about water some, or they wouldn't be in the course in the first place. So I could really let them work on whatever project they wanted. And these are pretty wide-ranging. So there's a grad student in geography who's very interested in maize varieties, particularly the indigenous maize varieties in Mexico. And so he came up with a project looking at irrigated versus dry land maize cultivation. Do you irrigate the crop or just let the rain be sufficient? Is the rain just sufficient? And was able to trace out some changes in irrigation schemes and in maize varieties. That's quite different from someone who wanted to promote youth through poetry. And so writing poems about places or nature would somehow promote them. That was her master's project, fine. Someone else who's going to go on and do, I think, kind of developing science programming for elementary and junior high school students, looked at different kind of classroom projects around waters, and then a number of projects on an ecology student who's quite biological, but who was interested in learning a bit more about the effects of removing dams on restoring salmon populations. These, quite a wide range. So I reviewed course a couple times with Andy and Michaela, and planned for small group activity and SmartSite, use of SmartSite. And so the first week of the class was just group planning. Like, I came in with not this perfect scheme for sustainable development with the 3 resources and the 4 themes and the 2 projects that sort of would form just a very nice brick, but just had some ideas of what we were going to cover. I came in with 5 themes for water. I should say also was working on a review paper on water, and in fact what I've been doing all day today, except coming in here, is reformatting the references, if you think, and the EndNote style library did not quite meet my expectations, which I will say were enormously high. So I've been I spent the morning deleting parentheses and italicizing, and I'll do some more of that when I go back. Anyway, working on this review paper meant that I had a scheme that I could I could give them the scheme, but there were these 5 themes. This is weeks 2 through 6, but I was pretty open to what we were going to do. So I thought I had some ideas for what the assignments would be, but I talked over, broadly they were going to move towards doing a paper, and I would have them do a short version of the paper as a presentation to the class. And then there was some participation. So the participation and the group projects, the groups did some of the leading more than I did. So the group, the individual participation, the group participation, and the paper were going to have to add up to 100%. But I had some flexibility in how much that was. And also had some suggestions. I initially was I have it. the way that radio announcers have a horror of what they call dead air, I have something analogous as an instructor. I just feel that there has to be content, and so I often tend to put too much out, fearing that there'll be silence. So I had 1 week that I didn't know what to do, and I thought that they could do a sort of little mini water project in Davis, and they thought that was a nice idea, but really they had quite enough to do, thank you. And so they wanted more use of visuals. You were not surprised to hear that I'm a fairly verbal person, and so I think pictures, yeah, they're fine. But they had some nice ideas for how to use visuals. One of my thoughts was, how do I give my take on the various themes? Like, if there are these 5 themes in studying water, one is thinking of water not merely as a resource, but kind of this very elemental substance in our sort of proto-human cosmology is one. Value of water is another. Equity, how water is distributed, is the third. I'm quite relieved that I can remember them. Governance is the fourth. How is it managed? And then fifth is the politics, because the governance assumes that we've got the politics worked out, and of course we never do. So those were the 5 themes, and I had things to say about them, and I was thinking, well, if I start the class with even a short lecture, does that kind of set the tone too much, or am I too sort of authoritative? And their idea, it was an excellent one, was to have me give the following weeks the 15 minutes or half hour, actually, the half-hour presentation on the theme at the end of the previous session. So I could just kind of lay it out for them, and they could take notes. They'd have it if they wanted. I actually posted my notes, and they could look at have those as they did the readings, and then come in and they would do the discussion. One of the things we did with SmartSite was to have students post notes on the readings, just really short notes. These, just even bullet points, don't have to be full sentences. And the students organized themselves into groups where each group would take a turn reviewing the comments that students had posted, and then kind of summarizing them and presenting them at the beginning of the class meeting to spark discussion. And since they were taking some since they would be the presenters at some point, there was kind of the temptation to postpone posting the notes. People always like to extend deadlines, but they knew that they would actually have to meet as a group to pull these notes together. So that meant that we actually worked out a good schedule. And that worked out fairly well. Week 7, I was out of town, it turns out, so that's what happened to my frantic worry. And then weeks 8 through 9, the students presented versions of their papers. When I say drafts, they presented PowerPoint presentations, and we went through a whole group process of organizing them into groups. Everyone had like their theme, and so we were able to organize the themes kind of into clusters, and some of them formed neatly, some took a little longer. And then they agreed on what order they would present, because was there a logical order? And I think that meant that they're the ones who were going a week early. When you're in week 6 or 7, you feel like a whole extra week would make a big difference. But no, they worked out quite happily. Presentations were good, and they got a lot of feedback. And there's this whole thing about constructive criticism, which to me is a very kind of fuzzy notion, because on the one hand, people need feedback, and it seems to me that constructive criticism basically means a long sentence with 2 clauses in which the conjunction is but. And I think they just were able to say, you know, more I like this, I didn't like that. It was a small group, 11 people, they knew each other. Worked out pretty well. The week 10 was just a review and evaluation. People were able to kind of pull together the points. This is, Andy and Michaela and I were initially talking a lot about interdisciplinarity. It came out, since the majority of the students were from community development, wasn't quite as crucial, but there was time to talk about that. I realized, once again, I'm worried about time, but so here here are the 3 courses. I realized that you could correlate this also with the percentage of women students in the course. This was 10 women and one man, and had a very non-competitive atmosphere. And this one, but anyway, okay. So you could look at this. and easily compare these. That you could. The problem here is that this was so highly structured, so structured and so led by the instructor that it was kind of faced severe problems. But I think you can also look at this. There's first of all my gradual learning. I have often said to people that I have few regrets of my many wonderful years here in Yolo County and teaching here at this fine institution. And one of my strongest regrets is that I didn't start working with the TRC earlier. I have said that many times, it's true. So I think having the more input could help. Class size, I think, is also important. And I think, so those anyway are my thoughts. So I can ask if there are any questions. Yes?
Why do you think you did take so long to go to the TRC? Because I have many young colleagues that I'm having a hard time getting them interested in doing this, and I don't want them all to have the same regrets.
Well, you first of all could say that of course we really know what everything is about is publications. You could say that. You could say that if you've...
Is that your case, do you think?
In my case, I have often said that for the faculty who think that the most important thing is that are really very concerned about the merit reviews and who think that the most important thing is the Roman numeral that comes after their job title. That's what we have left of classical education here at UC, or the Roman numerals up to 9. And so for those people, I think the people who are excellent teachers get rewarded in the merit process, and those who are terrible teachers get held back. But I think there's a broad middle group who think they're probably good enough. And so you just have to ask that whole question of what motivation is, and that's a mystery. I mean, it seems to me unfortunate that these courses interact with my writing and my research in various kinds of ways. I think also graduate school kind of communicates to students, learn how to get a PhD, learn how to do research and how to publish. And I think there are other areas where faculty, new assistant professors don't get training. Teaching is one of them, but any kind of administration is another. Working with staff, working with TAs, any sort of management. You just have to kind of do it by common sense and wing, and you hope some common sense and common decency. But I think it's, people kind of think, but I really should get back. There's this kind of anxiety that a lot of people have about their publications. And I think teaching, first of all, I think teaching is enormously satisfying. It connects with how we're reviewed. You learn from it, and you just feel better I feel better walking into a classroom with the sense that there's tapping into the energy. You could possibly tell them that it's actually a time saver. That might be a way to sort of to lure them in, and it would probably work. You could say, you know, a couple meetings, you'll be surprised. You'll get a bunch of great tips, and you could use it. You'll be able to, what you learn about one course, you'll be able to use in others. In the long run, it's a time saver. That's probably the way to persuade them.
Can I add something? What he said is true. Many department chairs do tell people that, why wasting time doing this?
Well,
I'm
I
not
don't do
kidding.
that, but
because I
still...
say that the only thing that's important is number of publications. They don't even care what's in them. So when we have that culture, it's very difficult for young people who pretty much commit suicide, spending a lot of time in teaching.
Well, we don't have that trouble, but I was just curious whether you thought maybe you had to have a certain amount of comfort with your classroom. In other words, you were talking about the psychological aspect of that Gary was working with you. So I was just curious whether you, looking back on your psychotherapeutic relationship with the TRC and teaching, whether there's something, time saving is always good, but whether there's something psychological about being willing to go to the TRC as well.
Well, I'm also, I have been, I came to Davis in 1974 when many of you were alive. And I came from this mode in which I gave lectures, and lecturing was admired and respected, and I think attention patterns really have changed. So I think it took me a while to learn that. There's another thing you can tell the assistant professors, which I just remembered, and that's when you have to write your summary, when you have to prepare your statement that you submit to your department for your merit, the teaching is going to look mostly at the amount of teaching and then the teaching evaluations with certain numerical scores. But you want to be able to just list stuff you've done. And it's hard for academics to lie. So they want to list things. And if you say, I consulted with the TRC for this course twice, that's actually something you can list in your statements. And if you could construct a little narrative of how you got a 4.1 overall and a 4.3 for enthusiasm, but a 3.7 for appropriate assignments, then you could say you worked with them on that. And that would, we believe, gladden the hearts and would lead to an upward adjustment of your Roman numeral. Yes?
Could you elaborate on how you got 8 students to commit themselves for 6 quarters? What was involved in terms of recruiting them, and how did you handle anybody else want to join the cohort group?
Well, I sent out, I would send out flyers. I would contact, I knew some students and I knew some faculty, and so I'd send out emails in advance to the graduate students in the core programs. And I knew that I wanted 8 because that was a number of chairs around the table in this place that we met, and it was a very cozy space. And it seemed to me not too many, not too few. And there are a couple times where I had a little difficulty recruiting, and I had a few students who wanted to stay for a 3rd year. I think one of the questions that comes up again and again is how much work was it? And it always seemed to me that it wasn't that much time, but they're tasks that I've learned how to do. I think a lot of the students recognized that it was an unusual opportunity. And then in terms of this reward system, they were, not only did they get their name on the masthead, but they had these pieces, which even if they're just 150 words, are pieces with, that they could put in their CVs. So I think that helped. And they got some free books, because the books that didn't go out for review, they got to pick from. And I think it just had a pleasant atmosphere.
I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about the balance between structuring a class really heavily and leaving it a little more open for discussion with the students. You pulled that out as one of the variables of
Yes.
success of the course. And also you could see the change over time in your different courses. And coming into teaching as a new person, I'm thinking like my level of confidence about teaching, I'm really structuring my courses so I know that they're organized. But maybe with more time and more confidence in teaching, it becomes more fluid. I don't know.
Well, I think first of all, there are other people who know more about this than I do. I think it's one of the things about these 3 courses I was talking about is that they're all highly specific, and so I tried to design what would work for the specific course. But I think there is often scope to give students some space. If there's scope to give students space for structuring, and I think that giving them some space early can be very positive. It causes them to have some buy-in. The thing that I think almost always works is that dividing students into small groups and giving them tasks is very important, because students will be more committed to a group that involves them and 2 fellow students than they might be to the whole course or even to the thought of the grade. And that's one of the things talked about with Andy and Michaela is what's a good size group. And it might be that there are some courses, I think it just depends enormously on the course. There are some courses where there's a very specific body of material, and so I'm thinking of things like an introductory language course or organic chemistry, where there really is a certain body of material. And I think there are times where the students, they may also welcome structure. The extreme case is of the faculty member who makes up a final exam that says compose a question and answer it. That's actually very lazy. I don't think that's really delegating too much responsibility. So the other thing about the courses, though, is that you have some time. I mean, if we're presenting this review system as something that has many unintended consequences because of the structure that it contains, I think it is fairly merciful in allowing, the faculty, our contracts are those of us who are on the tenure track have relatively long contracts. And so you could just start it out, and your student evaluations will either be great from the beginning or they'll improve. Either of those, no, seriously, either of those will make good narratives. But again, this is just, you have a great resource this year, and plenty of time if you're not starting till the fall.
Two comments that I might add would be, one, to be transparent with your students about why you're taking whatever approach you're taking, and that you've been thoughtful and structured in your thinking as to why you're going to at times abandon structure or emphasize structure much less. So that students understand that there's a plan, even if the plan is much more student-centered and kind of purposefully empowering of students, giving them more responsibilities. But that there are reasons that you're doing that. And then if you come talk to us at the TRC, we can also talk to you about research to back that up in terms of what we know about how adults learn. Another unexpected resource that you might consider is our freshman seminar program. Because by teaching a freshman seminar, you can, and you're expected to, experiment with different ways of interacting with your students. It starts out as a small group, you might say, in terms of breaking students into small groups. It starts off as a small group. You're often teaching your enthusiasms rather than required topics. And you're helping students as freshmen to kind of discover their own enthusiasm about whatever subjects that you're presenting to them. And I think that a lot of those principles can also come into play with graduate courses. And this probably is an important part of the course that was journal-centered. That obviously this is something that you loved. It's exciting to interact with faculty and scholars from all over the country, even all over the world. That there are a lot of internal rewards for that sort of work. And a freshman seminar often works the same way because we're not paid cash for those, right? So we do it because we love them. But there's no reason that all of our classes shouldn't interact with some of that enthusiasm and reflect the deep interest that we have in the topics that we teach. But often we don't want to experiment in a huge class, right, with different approaches. But a freshman seminar, you're actually supposed to experiment. You're supposed to try something out, and if it doesn't work, the risks are low, right, for you, for your students. People can still learn a lot from a freshman seminar when things are tried and they don't work. So that might be another approach to think about, well, what might be the sandbox that I could try out some of these ideas before I go into a big class.
Another question here?
Quick question.
Sure.
You commented about the review process. Bhushnan had some thoughts on that too.
Yes.
As you move up to the more senior level and have an opportunity to perhaps shape some of that review process, do you have any thoughts about how you can and will or should do that?
That's, I actually had not, the simple, I'm trying to find something better to say than no. Because I have to say, I have experienced it is, well, I've sort of thought of Sauron's eye as being located on the 5th floor of Rack Hall rather than in the Temple of Doom, that just sort of reaching me through any amount of mist, recording, knowing whether I've been recording. So I think what you can do is try to set a department culture, is what you can do. That's one place where you talk to other people and also try to, I mean, one of the as an anthropologist, I'm sort of an ethnographer everywhere. And it was with horror that I developed a hypothesis and then confirmed it, that when faculty are talking to other faculty, they have 3 terms that they use to describe the caste at the university. If talking about other faculty, they say people. Talking about students, they say kids. And they never refer to staff at all. So I try, it's true. I mean, if you say were there a lot of people, so, or at least in my circles. So I think you can work against that, and you can, if people, there are common complaints about students. Those are often voiced, and I think that's another thing. So in these sort of very dispersed.
If I could just
sure.
To
yes.
the people in this room, unless those of us who have been participating in this faculty mentoring faculty and have done the teaching and the experimentation, unless you take an active role in the process of change for merit and promotion review, it's not going to change. And this group is the one that can affect that, and it's one of our obligations to try to make that happen.
Well, it's true. Thanks.
Yeah, that's right. About this, the discussion, trying to bring the science students and the social science students together.
Yes.
Did you ever, you work? How much did you work directly with your TA on that type of thing? Because we had a discussion. That's another option then. Well,
that would work. That's an element in the in my upper division course, and where there's a mix. Where there's also a mix of some students from natural science and some from social science. But I think the separation is more entrenched at the graduate level, where the students have really acquired are really acquiring a whole professional identity. And so these courses are smaller and don't have TAs. But it's an excellent point to keep in mind. That's, just broadly to think of all the different resources that can exist, and to think of, with that other course, I really could have found exercises to, so the kind of thing I could have done in that other course would be to just have a more open session of, which could have been about soils or about fish or about biodiversity, and just had people talk about what kind of words they have and what thoughts they have, and get them up on a board and try to find ways to show the connections as well as the separation, so that to find that there are that they have many points in common, even if they think they're thinking about them differently. I think could have tried to. I mean, that's one thing I could have, certainly one thing I could have done, and I could have, presumably with some reflection and some guidance, come up with more.
Yeah, I like that. I'll try it and I'll get back with you.
Sure.
When you mentioned reviewing manuscripts,
yes.
Is there a confidentiality issue that when somebody sends it to you, can you share that with your students?
Well, I gave them a very serious lecture. This is the one slip and you're out. And I told them that they really have to not talk about the manuscripts at all. That it's very easy, and I gave them the example that I once mentioned to a colleague in anthropology, that I was reviewing a manuscript about archaeology of a particular region in the world. And that was enough to get them to say, oh, was it more about economics or about ritual, or architecture? And then they really wanted to just pull out for me who it was. So I told them that they were just sworn to confidentiality, and they had to, and I could say it's very tempting. It's really very tempting to talk about the manuscripts, and that's just one of the things you learn, is that you can't. And I said, it's, if I hear that something gets out, I won't, you'll have to leave. And they seemed to take that seriously, and to my knowledge, there wasn't any problem. And that person who apostrophe uses the apostrophe S, has only got out.
No, but even if, let's say, in the worst case, they talked about it, but you get into trouble because you were entrusted with that information, right?
Yes, no, that's a risk. That's certainly a risk. And I thought, on the other hand, that didn't seem, partly I had a strong incentive to teach the class, because I wanted to I wanted to free up some time, and I actually wanted to work with the students. And I think the journal was better for their input. I think it was kind of freer, and I saw things differently. And I thought, well, I'm willing to take, it seemed to me, a risk I was willing to take.
Well, I've really enjoyed this and very much appreciate your comments, and also what we could pull out of you, though you're willing to give it, during the question and answer period. And I'm wondering as well if we can share your PowerPoint with folks who have come to today's presentation.
Sure, sure.
All right, great. Well, Ben Orlove, thank you very much for your words today. I invite you all to come back a week from right now for another presentation from one of your faculty peers. And we'll be here every Friday throughout the rest of the quarter. Thanks very much and enjoy your weekends. That was wonderful.
This is great.
Yeah.
It's fun. And it's such a nice, such a, easy audience.
Yeah.
People want to be here.
Right. Well, there's a lot of gratitude.